Welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and today my co-host, Elwyn Robinson, is interviewing Dr. Michael Platt, the author of Adrenal Dominance. And today, Elwyn is doing a deep dive with Dr. Platt, going into why he feels that adrenaline may be the root cause behind so many diseases that are thought to be incurable today. Now, maybe you are someone that has a specific issue with, not sleeping through the night, waking up so many times and you can't fall back asleep. Or maybe, road rage is a thing for you. And so deep into these little avenues and areas, Dr. Platt goes deeper into where all of this could just be related to adrenaline. And during this interview, Elwyn and Dr. Platt discuss many areas, including bioidentical hormones and what Dr. Platt feels could be an easy, simple solution that's going to address the root cause of why you feel this way and how you can feel better. So sit back, join us, and let's get started.
So, Dr. Platt, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Before we get into the topic of today's call, would you mind telling us a little bit about your personal background? You mentioned in one of your books how you started off in medicine in an HMO, which I thought was quite interesting. You said, the focus is more on preventing disease rather than treating it. Would you mind telling us a bit more about your background?
Well, I was born and raised in New York City, went to medical school in New York City, became board certified in internal medicine, headed out to California. I got involved with hormones because my mother had breast cancer, and I realized after she died that I had inherited her hormones. And she, especially her too much insulin, low progesterone. Anyway, so I used to have to slap my face when I was driving, trying to keep my eyes open. And I started using progesterone cream, and I never got sleepy. So I know that progesterone was blocking insulin, and that got me very interested in hormones. So I learned as much as I could, and I opened up a clinic dealing with hormones. And so that's basically the more I learned, and eventually, after I had the luxury of spending at least 1.5 or 2 hours with each patient, and you learn about how the body operates when you sit down and talk to people.
And why were you able to spend so long when these days, a doctor only has 5 minutes? What was the setup?
Well, I wasn't using insurance, and it was my own clinic, so I had the luxury of doing whatever I wanted to with it. And I wrote a book called The Miracle of Bioidentical Hormones, and literally thousands of patients came in from all over the country and all over the world because of this book. And so but anyway, but I noticed after talking to a lot of these patients that one thing they had in common is there's a lot of their symptoms were the same. And I realized after a while that this was all due to excess adrenaline.
That leads perfectly into my my next question, which is, what is adrenaline, and then what is adrenaline dominance? Which is a term you coined, I believe, right?
Yeah, well, most people have heard of adrenaline, and it's mostly known as the fight or flight hormone, and which is true. When people are in danger, the body pours out adrenaline. But that's actually a very rare reason why the body puts out adrenaline, unless you live in the Ukraine. And so adrenaline is not only a hormone, but it's a neurotransmitter. So it does a lot in the body and has a big effect on how we feel and how we act. But nobody ever talks about adrenaline. And yet it's like the number one reason why people have trouble sleeping. And we can talk later, and people will understand that it may be the number one reason why people have a weight problem, believe it or not.
So what is it to be adrenaline dominant? Does that mean that we have more adrenaline than average, or we release it more commonly? What does the term mean?
Well, adrenaline dominance, it's my own term,
Mm-hmm.
and basically what it does, it sort of just describes a situation where the body is putting out more adrenaline um, than the body needs, and this has a big effect on how people are. Um, I'm a great believer in treating the cause of illness. And excess adrenaline is a major cause of a lot of illnesses, a lot of them felt to be incurable.
Mm. Well, yeah, I would definitely want to get into that soon. Just to like emphasize about adrenaline. So, what is the difference between adrenaline and noradrenaline? What is your understanding of that difference? I know that medically, adrenaline is used to reduce circulation to the extremities or to an area, and then noradrenaline is more often used as an anti-inflammatory, right? But like beyond that, in terms of their function as hormones and neurotransmitters, how do they make us feel? What's the difference?
I think when people have excess noradrenaline, they have a lot of the same symptoms as people who have excess adrenaline. So I don't separate the two.
Oh, so that you class them together?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. And so why do some people have higher adrenaline than others? What's your understanding? I think you mentioned earlier maybe you thought genetics, but is there any other factors that would cause some people to be adrenaline dominant and not others? Or does everyone have adrenaline dominance based on your definition?
Well, yeah, I mean, the primary reason why people will have excess adrenaline or adrenaline dominance is genetic. So if if a child has ADHD, for example, then one or both parents will have ADHD.
Okay, so genetics the main thing, and could like trauma, in early life and stuff like that, cause someone to be hypervigilant and have more adrenaline as well?
No, it's genetics.
Okay, fair enough. I'm a believer in genetics. I have a whole company doing it. I was just curious what you thought. Okay. And now you just mentioned ADHD. That leads perfectly to my next question. So this is one of the distinctions I loved in your book, because, of course, ADHD is generally thought of, as far as I'm aware, anyway, as like a dopamine deficiency, which is why they treat it usually with drugs that increase dopamine. So what is your understanding of what ADHD is, what really causes it, and then what are the types of ADHD?
ADHD, which as most of your listeners will realize, it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so that's one type of ADHD. There's another type that I call a creative type ADHD. And these are the children that have trouble focusing, but they're not hyperactive. And yet, children with this type of ADHD, the creative type, they have more adrenaline than kids with ADHD. And the reason for that is that ADHD, it's not a learning disorder, it's an interest disorder. If they're interested, they'll focus. If they're not interested, they will not focus. But what's interesting, again, when it comes down to treating the cause, if you treat the cause of ADHD, you can actually eliminate ADHD in 24 hours. A lot of these kids are put on stimulants, Ritalin, Strattera, Adderall, and these drugs are pure adrenaline. And what they do, they actually numb the brain. And that's why a lot of kids don't like these drugs. And one of the side effects is sudden death, because these kids have a lot of adrenaline to begin with, and you give them more adrenaline. But if you understand why the body is putting out adrenaline and approach it from that direction, then you can get a tremendous decrease in adrenaline very quickly.
And let's just ask that before I go back to ADHD, because I think you were about to say it, maybe I interrupted you. So why is the body creating that excess adrenaline? As you said, usually it's not because there's a real life-threatening situation happening outside us. So what is it?
Well, there's basically two reasons why the body puts out adrenaline. One, if they're in danger, But that's actually a very rare reason why the body puts out adrenaline. Um, the primary function of adrenaline is to raise sugar levels for the brain. It's a process called gluconeogenesis, where the body converts protein into glucose, sugar. And that's the main function of adrenaline, is to raise sugar levels for the brain. And most people don't realize that the brain actually uses more sugar than any other tissue in the body. So anytime the body detects that the brain is low in sugar, it just puts out adrenaline.
And so you talked about those people with ADHD before. So is the reason why they need, do they use their brain more, and that's why they need more sugar to the brain? Is that?
Well, the creative ones, they use their brain more. You know, if you look at the music industry, a lot of drugs and alcohol. And people, when they have a lot of adrenaline, very often get involved with drugs and alcohol just to relax, just to chill out. But creative people do, their brain is active all the time. This is why creative people, when they're in a car, very often get very sleepy, because their mind is registering all that scenery that's going by, and they're thinking about things and talking, listening to the radio. In other words, the brain just uses up a lot of fuel, and when it runs out of fuel, it falls asleep.
And if you don't want to fall asleep, you mustn't fall asleep, as you just said, like if you're driving or you're at work or something, then the body will release adrenaline to release sugar to keep the brain awake.
Right, and I mentioned, at the beginning, that I started using progesterone and I never got sleepy, and that's because progesterone blocks insulin. So people that have trouble getting sleepy in a car, once they start using progesterone, will not get sleepy.
Okay, let's talk about progesterone in a minute, but actually let's get into insulin. So what is the connection between adrenaline and insulin?
Probably very little connection. It's just that, progesterone blocks three major hormones in the body. It blocks adrenaline, blocks insulin, and it also blocks estrogen. And these can be very toxic to the body. So, and so later on, people will begin to realize how important progesterone is.
It would also block cortisol, I believe, right? Progesterone. Do you know what?
Well,
no.
No, I don't. I don't believe it blocks cortisol, but what it does, it blocks adrenaline, which creates elevations of cortisol.
Oh, so it's indirect. That makes sense.
So indirectly, it does.
Okay. So what mechanism is this? Too much in the weeds, or does it use up the receptor sites, or do you know how it works that it blocks estrogen, adrenaline, and insulin?
I'm not a scientist, but I can only assume that what progesterone does, it blocks the receptor sites for these other hormones.
Okay, so uses them up so the other things can't get in. Okay. Just back to the different types of ADHD for a second, and insulin. So, in that connection, the connection between the two. So, because you said, progesterone, which we'll talk about later, blocks insulin, which is good. But a lot of people, when they think of insulin, they think of people with diabetes who need insulin, right? So a lot of people think of insulin as a good thing. So could you explain a little bit more, why it's a good thing to block insulin?
Well, we need insulin to get sugar into our cells. There's no question. But insulin is also the hormone that creates fat, especially around the middle. And it raises blood pressure. It speeds up the aging process. So, it's an important hormone. We can't live without it, but you don't want to be exposed to too much insulin. So, it's actually usually healthy to control insulin.
Okay.
And one of the ways you can control it is with progesterone.
Could you reduce the insulin too much if you blocked it too much?
I've never run into that.
Okay.
And I used a lot of progesterone, a lot of people.
Okay, interesting. And so just to explain to people the connection, connect me if I'm right, or wrong, sorry. So adrenaline will raise sugar, and then the sugar will trigger the release of insulin, right? And the theory is that I understand is the body will produce too much insulin often, which then will lower the blood sugar too much, which will cause the adrenaline to be released again to release more sugar, which will cause an overproduction of insulin. And so it's just a constant roller coaster.
It's a cycle. Yes.
Okay. And so it's really important then to block that. We don't want it to be going up, the blood sugar, but we also don't want it to be going down. We want it to be stabilized, right?
That's right.
So what happens to someone with these kinds of ADHD? That's what I wanted to go back to. What happens to their blood sugar if they have those types of ADHD?
Well, they will have extra glucose. They will have that. You may be familiar with a blood test called the hemoglobin A1C. And when the hemoglobin A1C is elevated, people are told that they're pre-diabetic. But the number one reason why people have an elevated hemoglobin A1C is actually adrenaline.
Oh, because the adrenaline keeps raising the blood sugar?
Yes.
Okay. So then do you end up with too high blood sugar and too high insulin then? I think this is the thing that I got from you, which is the opposite of what the mainstream understanding is, right?
You get an elevation in two hormones that are not healthy for the body. So, and they both speed up the aging process.
That's insulin and adrenaline.
Yeah.
But you also have what I'm asking is it possible that people pre-diabetic and possibly even diabetic have excess levels of sugar and insulin? Because I think the traditional idea is that you have excess levels of sugar and not enough insulin, right?
Right. Well, they have what's called insulin resistance, where the insulin just doesn't work.
Yeah. My understanding of like what is taught generally is that, to begin with, the body overproduces insulin, and then the body becomes resistant to it, and then eventually it stops producing insulin altogether, which they call type 2 diabetes. Is that correct from your understanding?
Yeah, that is correct. There's also a type 3 diabetes, which insulin resistance in the brain. And that's a precursor to Alzheimer's.
So the rest of the body does get enough sugar, but the brain doesn't?
Right. It's just in the brain that the insulin doesn't work.
And what causes that? The adrenaline again?
Well, I don't. That's probably a genetic thing also, but
oh, interesting.
It's not common, but yeah. But in terms of ADHD, I had ADHD. I used to get up and walk out of class. I couldn't focus at all in school, and it wasn't until I got into medical school that I started learning, and that's what I'm saying is that the whole thing about ADHD is not a learning disorder. It's an interest disorder. If you're interested, you'll focus. If you're not interested, you will not focus. So there was nothing in high school or college I really was focusing on.
I like that definition. And by that definition, I do have it. Like, I never thought of myself as someone who has it because I am able to deeply focus. But I've based my whole life around being able to deeply focus on what I want to focus on, not what someone else is telling me to focus on. Because I, was very, very bad at being able to focus on what I was told to if I wasn't interested. So that's an interesting distinction.
A lot of kids have trouble with algebra, and it's a subject that once they leave high school, they'll never need algebra. What they should do is eliminate those subjects that kids have a hard time focusing on because they're not interested in it. But schools don't look at ADHD from that standpoint.
I agree. I personally think the only thing that children should be forced to learn is language so they can communicate, and everything else should be a choice based on interest.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to go through the list, as many as you want to go through, of all the different potential symptoms of this adrenaline dominance or excess adrenaline. You list maybe 24 or so in your book. I wanted to talk about at least a few of them. But I was running this by my colleague Chrissy, and one of the questions she asked, which I'll ask you before we get into all the different symptoms, she asked, why does it, and I think I know your answer to this, but I promised I would ask you, why does it show up so differently in different people? So why does it show up as, an emotional issue in one person, and it shows up as pain in another, and it shows up as addiction in another, and it shows up as weight gain in another? Why is it so variable?
I don't have the answer for that.
Okay.
It affects so many different things, and I guess everybody's a little bit different from an environmental standpoint, from a genetic standpoint. But people with a lot of adrenaline very often have a lot of the same symptoms. Well, they have trouble sleeping. Some people, their mind will race. Some people toss and turn. That's grinding teeth is classic for excess adrenaline. Being a little bit quick to anger, because adrenaline is an anger hormone. Cold hands and cold feet is only caused by excess adrenaline. Irritable bowel syndrome, constipation will be another symptom.
And all those are very common among people with excess adrenaline.
People with a lot of adrenaline carry a lot of tension in the back of the neck, and this can cause tinnitus, and it can cause headaches. You've heard of people that complain about migraine headaches, but every patient that I've seen who thought they had migraine headaches had another type of headache called occipital neuritis, and it comes from the occipital nerve sheath at the base of the skull, causes excruciating headaches. 100% of the time, these are mistaken for migraines, and these are not migraine headaches, and these are easy headaches to get rid of. If doctors were aware of them, how easy it is to get rid of these kind of headaches, but doctors are not trained to treat the cause of illness. They just give out Band-Aids.
And so I can't go on to the next thing without asking you how you treat it. Is it basically by treating adrenaline, same as everything else? Or is there anything else specifically? Yeah. Okay, so we'll get into that very soon. I just want to talk about some of the issues around it first. Okay, so you mentioned a lot of them. So IBS, let's pick on that one for a second. Why would excess adrenaline cause IBS? What's the connection?
Adrenaline is what they call a survival hormone. And during the survival response, when the body releases all this adrenaline, it cuts off blood supply to areas of the body that are not needed for survival. The body's primary concern is survival and, keeping you alive. And so when people are in danger, they don't need their intestines working. So the body cuts off blood supply there. It also, people should realize, it cuts off blood supply to the salivary glands. And so when people do saliva testing for hormones, I never recommend that because the hormones don't get into the saliva.
So would it reduce saliva, the amount of saliva that you have in your mouth as well?
People with chronic anxiety, and basically the only thing that causes anxiety is adrenaline, excess adrenaline. And these people very often complain about a dry mouth. Yeah.
Which then is bad for oral health, right? I've just done an episode on that, having good amounts of alkaline saliva is important for that. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. So what about weight? That's a very contentious one because obviously some people with adrenaline dominance, like me, I had adrenaline dominance. I'm 6'3", and when it was quite bad for me, I got down to 130 pounds. I was really, really underweight. For other people, it's the opposite, right? They can get super, super heavy. So what's the distinction there as to, what's going on there?
The reason, remember I mentioned that the reason why the body puts out adrenaline is to raise sugar levels. Now, adrenaline peaks at 2:30 in the morning. And it also, by the way, gives people that urge to urinate. They have a thing called overactive bladder, where in women where they have to race to the toilet, otherwise they'll get some leakage. Um, and also bedwetting in children is only caused by excess adrenaline, and you only see that in creative type children. Remember, they're the ones with the excess adrenaline.
With the overactive brains.
Right. So the body is putting out adrenaline to raise sugar levels. And remember I mentioned it peaks at 2:30 in the morning when people are just lying in bed. And when the body puts out adrenaline, which is a very powerful hormone, it creates stress to the body. The body responds to stress by putting out cortisol to deal with the stress. And the first thing cortisol does, it also raises sugar levels. So now when people are just lying in bed, they're putting out two hormones that raise sugar. And the whole thing about sugar is that it doesn't matter whether you're eating sugar or if the body is making sugar. If you don't burn it up, all that excess sugar gets stored in your fat cells as fat.
Okay.
And I feel that this is the number one cause of weight gain, and nobody ever talks about it.
So is the difference that the person who tends to be thin, they produce more insulin? No, that couldn't be it. So, yeah, I'm still not clear about why some people would become very underweight and some would be overweight.
Okay, now remember, adrenaline, it's a powerful hormone, but it gives people a lot of energy. And so the only way you could have lost weight is if you were pretty active.
Not really. I think the main thing for me is that my digestion got so bad that I wasn't able to eat much. I think that's probably...
Adrenaline takes away the appetite.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that one of the other telltale signs of adrenaline dominance, that people aren't hungry in the morning, especially?
Yeah. In my book, I talk about this this patient who came in, and his number one complaint was that every morning he would wake up and vomit. And the only thing that'll cause that is adrenaline. And he had severe fibromyalgia, severe. And again, the underlying cause of fibromyalgia, again, is excess adrenaline. So I put some progesterone cream on his arm, and we started talking again. And after about 5 minutes, he sat back in his chair and he looked at me and he said, "Doc, in my entire life, I have never felt this good." And ever since he left my office, he never had another episode of nausea and vomiting.
Amazing. So what's the connection to fibromyalgia? Because this is fascinating to me.
Okay, well, the thing about, fibromyalgia is a pain condition. And the pain of fibromyalgia is caused by the buildup of lactic acid in the muscle tissues and tendon. Okay. And the reason why the body builds up all this lactic acid is that the adrenaline makes the muscle tense. People with fibromyalgia, they keep the muscle tense 24 hours a day. And so they have all this lactic acid and it causes pain. The other thing they complain about is fatigue. And the reason for the fatigue is that they're keeping the muscle tense, which uses up a lot of energy. So the way to get rid of fibromyalgia is to reduce adrenaline.
And why do some people, have that tendency to hold their muscles tense and never let go? What causes that from your perspective?
Well, again, it's just, I never thought about why some people do this and why some people do that. It's just that people are different.
They just do.
And they have a different way of responding.
I think what I was leading to was something else. So you mentioned it right at the beginning, and I think a little while ago as well, about anger. So you said that high levels of adrenaline, noradrenaline, will tend to make you feel angry. So I think a lot of the time people will relate to a lot of what you said about excess adrenaline, but I know a lot of people listening might think, "Oh, I don't get angry though," because a lot of people kind of suppress their anger. Maybe they'll admit to feeling frustrated, something like that. So didn't you say that there is a connection between suppressing anger and chronic pain?
Absolutely. The anger is a very powerful emotion. And there are some people that let it out and some people internalize it. And internalization of anger is one of the causes of depression. And which is another thing that adrenaline can cause it's another reason why people are depressed, from internalization of anger.
Are you familiar with the work of Dr. John Sarno? Because he was also based in New York.
No.
He basically taught, he had some famous clients like Howard Stern, and he basically taught that the vast majority of chronic pain conditions were down to repressed feelings, especially usually anger. So it's interesting that very much seemed true to me. There's a whole kind of system around what he realized that came about called TMS. So it's very interesting for me to read his work and understand it, and then come across yours and go, and the reason why a person feels so much upset and anger in the first place is because of the excess adrenaline. And then perhaps the reason for the excess adrenaline is because their brain or their body needs more blood sugar, right? So it's almost like the very root of it is a blood sugar. And this explains to me why, sometimes I would get up in the morning and I would do exercise and I'd do meditation and I'd feel blissful and I'd feel happy. And then maybe eventually I'd get downstairs after a few hours of not eating, and then, to get to work or whatever it might be. And then the smallest thing can set me off and I'm stressed again. I've done all that work to get and so I'm wondering now if that was simply, no matter how much of a good mindset I'm putting myself in with all these practices and all the rest, in the end of the day, if the blood sugar's low, the body will then raise adrenaline at the slightest excuse to try and raise the blood sugar. Does that make sense? Is that? Well,
what makes sense is that your brain has run out of fuel by the time when you wake up. There's no fuel. So you're living on adrenaline until you start eating.
And so if you're living on adrenaline, that's why very small things can upset you way more than they should do.
The anger hormone.
Yes. And let me ask you, because this is another question Chrissy asked me to ask you. Actually, no, sorry, I'm going to do that one later. Let me ask about addiction. Addiction's another big one. I think addictions and compulsions ruin a vast amount of people's lives, even not, the extreme end, but just on the moderate end. What's the connection between addiction and adrenaline?
Well, the adrenaline, like I say, is a very powerful hormone. And it creates a lot of stress. And the thing about when people under stress, whatever, they get involved with drugs and alcohol, just to relax. And so it's not a complicated connection. It's just, but I'd say it's one of the number one reasons why people get involved with drugs and alcohol. They're just trying to relax.
And why would they? There's a vast amount of tendency also to use stimulants, though, right? Like coffee or amphetamines. So I would assume an addiction to those is also related to adrenaline. What do you think?
Probably.
Do you find that people are also, less likely to be addicted to those things once they get the adrenaline under control in practice?
Well, they would be less likely.
Yeah. Oh, one more question before we get into what we can do about it. I have been a big proponent the last couple of years of recommending that people test for things rather than guessing. And I know that, your experience is more clinical in terms of actually helping people. But I'm curious as to, do you test people for this? And even if you don't, is there something you'd recommend for people who insist that they want to do a test?
The answer is yes to both questions.
Okay, great.
I always prefer treating people rather than lab tests.
Mm-hmm.
So when people that I see have excess adrenaline, I don't need a blood test to know that they have a lot of adrenaline. Just sit down and talk to them. But for those who do want to have testing, the best test for excess adrenaline is a morning blood cortisol test.
Okay.
And the reason for that, because the body releases adrenaline and creates stress. Now, the cortisol test should be done before 9 o'clock. It should be a blood test, never a saliva test, ever.
Okay.
Because remember, the hormones don't get into the saliva. That's where they come up with a condition called adrenal fatigue, which is a condition that doesn't exist. Adrenal fatigue is adrenaline dominance. but they will base it all on the basis of a low cortisol in the saliva in the morning. And but if they did a blood test, they find the cortisol level was elevated.
And so elevated, because, reference ranges are often just based on average people, not necessarily what's optimal. So, where would you want to, would the healthy level of cortisol be in the bottom half of the reference range? Or what are you looking at as an optimal cortisol level? And what would you consider an excessive cortisol level?
Okay, the normal cortisol level, a normal level goes up to 19.4.
Okay.
Now, the way they determine normal levels, they used medical students in hospitals, and all doctors have increased adrenaline. So obviously the cortisol level was high, and that's the normal level. But anything above 13 should be considered high.
Okay. And do you remember what kind of measurement that is? Because I think in the UK we use something different, so people have to do a conversion.
I'm not sure.
No, don't worry. We'll have to look it up. We'll put it underneath the video, no worries.
I would have to also, yeah.
Yeah, okay, no worries. Okay, so let's get into the solution. You've already mentioned this a few times. You do the same in your book. You actually talk about the solution right at the beginning of the book, and then you explain why it's a good idea, and then you go into more detail. And so the main two things that you recommend as a solution in the book Adrenal Dominance, anyway, is changing the diet to keep the blood sugar more balanced and using progesterone. Now, in terms of the diet, I'm happy to talk about that if you want, but your recommendations of people are actually identical to mine. So we don't have to cover them if you want, but you're welcome to. But progesterone is completely new information for people. It's not something I've recommended before.
Well, I need to say a little bit about the diet because that's actually more important than the progesterone cream is. The brain uses two different fuels. One is glucose. And the best source of glucose for the brain actually comes from vegetables because they don't produce a lot of insulin. And then the other fuel, which is even more important, are ketones. And, they have a thing called a ketogenic diet, which I don't recommend because it's a hard diet to accomplish. But basically, you can get ketones directly from coconut oil or something called MCT oil, which come from coconut oil. So if you provide the body with coconut oil, MCT oil, and vegetables, that'll take care of the brain, the need for fuel. And then the only other thing you have to add is a 5% progesterone cream. Now, 5% means that each pump is 50 milligrams, and that's the exact strength you need to block adrenaline. Now, England is tough about hormones.
Yeah, you have to get it as a prescription here, but you can buy it in America. You can buy it from the US and ship it here. That's perfectly legal.
Yeah.
Okay, so progesterone cream, 50 milligrams at a time. How many times a day would a person do this?
Well, if they have a lot of adrenaline to begin with, I recommend 4 times a day, just to begin with. And as soon as the adrenaline levels come down by eating correctly, which is only after a few days, they can cut it at twice a day is fine.
Okay.
It should be applied to the arm and rub the 2 arms together. Another good place is the back of the neck because people with a lot of adrenaline carry tension there.
What about the forehead? Because what about the forehead area?
Well, you want to put it with.
You said it reduces tension.
Well, yeah, which the cheeks would be a better place because there's more blood supply in the cheeks and you want it in the bloodstream actually.
Okay, I thought there was good blood supply to the forehead, but yeah, okay, no, fair enough.
Now, while we're talking about progesterone, they have an oral form of progesterone, like Prometrium, and doctors prescribe oral progesterone more than the cream, which is a shame because the problem with oral progesterone, it goes straight to the liver and it converts into a different hormone called allopregnanolone. So oral progesterone is not progesterone. And your listeners should be aware of that.
And when people look up progesterone, I think, Google mainstream, they're going to come across a lot of stuff about how it's not good for them. What I read in your book is that generally they're not talking about bioidentical progesterone. They're talking about the artificial drug form. Is that correct?
That is correct. They're called progestins. And they have all the same side effects as estrogen. And they have no relationship to natural progesterone, but they include them in the side effects.
Okay. So if you are open-minded about this and you want to research, if you are looking up the potential dangers of progesterone, make sure that it's about bioidentical progesterone before you take it seriously, because that's what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Okay. And what are the benefits of progesterone? You've really talked about, key ones like reducing adrenaline, reducing excess insulin, and also combating estrogen. I want to talk about estrogen in a little bit, so I'll put that on pause for a minute. But just in general, like, what are the benefits of progesterone? Because people listening to this, okay, I know they're going to think that this sounds weird, especially if they're men, right? Because isn't progesterone the female hormone? Is it going to make me more feminine and give me feminine traits if I take it as a man? And then for women, they're going to be concerned because they're like, what with my menstrual cycle, is it going to mess with my menstrual cycle if I have too much? Or so could you address each of those potential concerns?
First of all, people should understand that men and women have the identical hormones. Progesterone is not a female hormone. Now, men stop making progesterone around the age of 50, stops. And it's after the age of 50 that men start putting on weight around the middle because they have nothing to block insulin anymore. And they start getting prostate cancer because they have nothing to block estrogen anymore. So it's an important hormone for men. Plus, men also get anger issues and sleep issues. And I'm just saying that, road rage
Sure.
is adrenaline. So
okay, so
it's a healthy hormone.
Like men and women have the same amount of men and women both have testosterone, but men have, they produce at least 10 times as much, right? Maybe significantly more. And I know with estrogen, they say that past a certain point, like 40 or 50 years old, the men start actually having more estrogen than the women because the women's menstruation ends and then the men are having more and more of their testosterone converted into estrogen. But so with progesterone, I think most men listening to this could accept, okay, my body produces some progesterone, but they probably still have an idea in their head that they need way less than a woman because it's more a female hormone. So could you address that concern?
Well, everybody's different, and especially the way they react to hormones. But it's the kind of thing that there's no downside to using progesterone. You can't hurt yourself with it. So just use it and see how you feel. People that do have a lot of adrenaline, within minutes after using progesterone, they'll feel nice and relaxed. They'll be able to focus better. Remember, it's good for ADHD, and in terms of it controls insulin and adrenaline, and these are the two hormones that speed up the aging process. So why wouldn't somebody want to use progesterone cream?
Well, because they're scared of it, right? This is what I'm trying to help people address. I think the answer is either because they've never heard of it or they're scared of it, So we're helping people to become aware of it, and we're trying to address the concerns.
The problem is doctors are get no training in hormones. Even though hormones control everything in the body, doctors get no training in it. Just like they're not trained to treat the cause of illness. Doctors, unfortunately, and they're not know-it-alls.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code REJUVENATE. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code REJUVENATE for 20% off today.
Sure. So, okay, so that makes sense. So with, actually, let me ask you another question about diet. Let me just go back, because this is one of the ones I promised Chrissy I'd ask. What about fasting? Right? Everyone these days is talking about fasting, intermittent fasting. It's been used, in spiritual practices. It's part of the Islamic religion still, right? It's part of the Christian religion, so it's a spiritual thing. It's a religious thing. There's supposed to be all these different health benefits from fasting. And these days they talk about intermittent fasting. I think one of the benefits of intermittent fasting is supposed to be that it lowers insulin. So what's your opinion on it? I would assume your opinion on it is it's not a good idea if someone is still on the insulin, blood sugar, adrenaline roller coaster. But is it ever a good idea from your point of view to fast?
Well, the people that I see have problems with excess adrenaline. And I never recommend fasting for people with excess adrenaline, because the more they fast, the more adrenaline they put out.
So once my adrenaline stabilized, could I then try fasting and see if I can manage it? Is that a reasonable strategy?
Yeah, it's reasonable. A lot of people do intermittent fasting because they're trying to lose weight. But the problem is, if they keep on putting out adrenaline, which raises sugar levels, they're not going to lose weight.
Yeah, and I think the intermittent fasting thing, I think if people want to do it, so many people do it and then they skip breakfast. And to me, that seems like the worst way of doing it. I would think if you want to skip any meal, it would be dinner, especially if you want to lose weight. Mm-hmm. But skipping breakfast seems like the worst way to start your day, because you're going to be running on adrenaline. But the problem is, a lot of people, they say they feel great when they do it. Often they drink coffee, which stimulates even more, noradrenaline. Which is not really helping. Yeah, interesting. But as you said, adrenaline does reduce appetite. So because some people have success with intermittent fasting, is it possible that what they're doing is they're raising their adrenaline so much that they're reducing their appetite?
Could be, yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Let's talk about estrogen, which you mentioned earlier. So estrogen, I think most people know now that estrogen is not good, right? It's not good for men. I think all men if they're told they have high estrogen, they're going to say that's bad. But I think even women are realizing more and more the downside to having high levels of estrogen. So would you mind talking about estrogen and how progesterone helps with excess estrogen?
Estrogen is my least favorite hormone. But, there are 3 different types of natural estrogens for women. Mm-hmm. And the one that's used most often is estradiol, and that's the strongest estrogen there is. And that's the one associated with all the cancers. But there's another type of estrogen called estriol. And estriol is the only estrogen that does not cause cancer. And it's the only one that's effective for vaginal dryness. So this is the estrogen that I recommend, is estriol, and it comes in a cream. But women, they get cramps, and they get PMS, and they get fibroids and endometriosis, and it causes asthma, and it causes blood clotting, and it's so many downsides to estrogen. Like I say, to me, it's a very toxic hormone.
Could you expand on how it's toxic? You said about the cancer. In what other ways is it toxic?
Well, like I say, it causes things like cysts in the breast, fibrocystic disease. It causes 5 different cancers, uterine cancer, breast cancer, cancer of the ovaries, and it causes, like I say, endometriosis and fibroids, and it causes, like I say, asthma. Just to me, it's like I said, it's a toxic hormone.
And according to Dr. Ray Peat, I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He also wrote a book on progesterone.
Yeah.
He talks about estrogen as a stress hormone. That's how he sees it. Like it deranges the whole system. Like it is necessary for the miracle of birth in women, but it's not doing you any favors otherwise. Is that accurate from your point of view?
It's pretty accurate. It's like when women go through the menopause, and the most common hormone that's replaced is estrogen. But I tell people that the only reason they need estradiol is they're trying to get pregnant. It's a pregnancy hormone, and that's fine. So I agree with Dr. Peat.
And it also, I think in the teenage years, doesn't it lead to feminine traits in women? So they wouldn't kind of develop as women at all without estrogen?
Yeah, right. It stimulates breast formation. Yeah.
Yeah. But once you have the body of a woman already, it's not very useful for anything other than pregnancy.
Right. It causes cramps and PMS and breast tenderness.
And doesn't it cause weight gain more around the hips and butt rather than, like, insulin causes more weight gain around the waist?
Yeah. Insulin puts some fat around the middle. Estrogen puts some fat around the hips, thighs, and buttocks.
So that's one way you could assess your hormonal levels, is just where you're putting on weight to some degree.
Usually both places. So
yeah.
Okay.
And so what about progesterone? How does progesterone help with estrogen? What's the effect of it?
Well, it's like when women are put on birth control pills, they stop ovulating, which means they stop producing progesterone, which to me is the most important hormone in their body. And so I never recommend birth control pills.
And why is it the most important hormone in the body? Tell me about all its benefits.
Well, because insulin, adrenaline, and it blocks excess estrogen also.
Okay, so its main value is in what it blocks. Isn't it also beneficial for the brain?
Well, when the fetus is in the womb, it's progesterone that that helps the brain to form. Women that use progesterone throughout their entire pregnancy have babies that are extremely intelligent and very happy babies. So it's a very healthy hormone. Yeah,
I saw that in the work of Dr. Ray Peat. He talked about that as well, how like a 20-30 point IQ increase sometimes in children whose mothers are treated with progesterone, which is shockingly massive. And, potentially beneficial for the...
And he doesn't use a high dose of progesterone.
Okay.
I use a high dose of progesterone.
So can you tell us any of your personal experience with this? Like any patients you can tell us about without, obviously breaking confidentiality?
Well, I've had a number of women that have trouble getting pregnant, and as soon as they get on progesterone, they get pregnant. Women that have a lot of miscarriages, that's also caused by low progesterone. There's some women that vomit throughout their entire pregnancy, and they call that hyperemesis gravidarum. And again, that's caused by excess adrenaline. So that's also treated with progesterone. Sometimes women mention that the fetus does a lot of kicking in the womb. That's also adrenaline, by the way. And these are the babies or the fetuses that will wind up having colic when they're born. And progesterone is wonderful for colic in babies. Gets rid of it in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I had the first year of my life, so that's a sign again of adrenaline, right? What about being born prematurely? Yeah. Is that related to...
That may be that. I'm going to have to pass on that.
Okay. I was thinking about a lack of progesterone more than excess adrenaline in that case.
No, I understand. It could very well be, but I'm not. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. And so, what about in adults though? Does progesterone have beneficial effect in the brain in adults?
Well, you've heard of traumatic brain injuries, football players, traumatic brain injuries. The drug of choice for a traumatic brain injury is progesterone because it reduces swelling in the brain. You know, every first aid kit on the football field should have progesterone in it, and it doesn't.
Yeah, Dr. P, I believe, described progesterone as being able to replace a lot of the benefits of other hormones. Like, for instance, I think he said it has the same anti-inflammatory benefits as cortisol, so then you don't need high cortisol because progesterone kind of serves that function just as well. And I think there was like a few examples of that. So that's interesting. So I think the biggest thing that will probably throw people, especially men, about the progesterone is the dosages that you're recommending. I know that you're recommending them because they're effective to shut off excess adrenaline. But can you tell us, like, what makes you believe that it is okay for men to have such high dosage for an extended period of time when everything else says that it's not okay?
I'm not sure why they would say it's not okay, but what I'm talking about is 50 milligrams, and to me that's not a high dose. You know, John Lee, who was very big in hormones at one time, and you know he claimed that women only produce 20 milligrams of progesterone per day, and I used to talk at the same conferences that that he did, and we were very much against one another, but because I didn't believe that, you know, 20 milligrams I felt was way too low. But the problem with a low amount of progesterone is that it can go to estrogen receptor sites and act like estrogen. So for that reason alone, I don't recommend low progesterone levels. So, but 50 milligrams, that's not a problem. And that's not a high dose.
Yeah, I know it's not to you, but I'm saying if anyone tries to look it up, it will seem like it's really high. But I mean, you give us...
If you have somebody on progesterone cream, 5%, 50 milligrams, and they're using it a couple of times a day, 3, and then you do a progesterone level on them, you'll see it's very low. It hardly affects it at all.
Interesting. So would you say any excess the body easily metabolizes and gets rid of?
Well, there are so many progesterone receptor sites in the body. You know, the bones have progesterone. I mean, the progesterone receptor sites are everywhere. And so as soon as you put progesterone cream on, it gets in the bloodstream. It's gone in just a few minutes because it's attached to so many receptor sites. It has so many benefits that it can only help, you know.
I have to say...
You're not going to talk me out of it.
No, I don't plan to. I'm trying to ask all the skeptical questions that someone would ask. But I think this is a good point to share my personal experience so far. So when I looked up progesterone, as I said, not many people are talking about it for men, but like the Ray-Peat community was one of them that was. And there was kind of concerns with men taking relatively small doses, and that it was... The only downside I could see for men was people claiming that it reduced sex drive, reduced libido. Apparently, Dr. P even at one point claimed that it reduces penis size. And then, you know, some people anecdotally saying maybe they're having small doses and having less libido. I have not found that to be the case at all, taking the high amounts that you recommended. In fact, I would say my libido, sex drive, etc., has got stronger. Which I'd probably put down to the fact that it's just easier to relax, which is a prerequisite for that. So I have found no credibility to any of those claims about the negative side effects of progesterone for men from personal experience yet. If it ends up happening, I'll report it. But I'm inclined to believe you based on experience, Dr. Platt. I just want to ask the questions that I know skeptics will ask. And the explanation that you've given is a potential explanation. A lot of these people who are saying they're getting negative effects, they're doing maybe 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, something like that. So perhaps when you do the small doses, that it does have more of that estrogenic effect, which would, lower sex drive and stuff like that.
Estrogen will certainly cut they use it for chemical castration.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's a good point. That the low, yeah. But Ray Pete, I think his progesterone is an oral progesterone.
No, he recommended Progest-E, which is like a progesterone with vitamin E cream. That's.
He used to have an oil.
I think it was, but no, it's a transdermal oil as well.
Okay.
It's definitely at least partly transdermal. Maybe I'm sure you're right, they used it orally, but definitely partly transdermally. But yeah, you're right. Maybe some of those results are people using it orally. That's definitely possible. And so, okay, so that's men addressed as much as I think we can. For women who are listening to this, maybe they're already in bioidentical hormones from their doctor, if they're older, and maybe they're taking 20 milligrams a day, 40 milligrams a day. So what would you say to them if they're, considering this? And what would you say to them if they are still menstruating and maybe want to get pregnant? And would you say anything differently if, they're beyond that point?
If women want to get pregnant, when it comes, progesterone actually can prevent ovulation. So if a woman is trying to get pregnant and they're on progesterone, I tell them to avoid using it the first 7 to 10 days and use it every day for the rest of the month. That way they won't skip ovulation.
And use it in the dosage that you said before, 50 milligrams 2, 3, 4 times a day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that won't interfere with the menstruation process at all, having the higher progesterone?
It won't.
Okay.
Progesterone heals the uterus. That's where it's progestation, or that's where the name comes from, progesterone. So any woman who wants to get pregnant should really be on progesterone just to heal the uterus and get it ready for pregnancy.
In that same way, like the same dose you've really said, and like every day except for the first 7 to 10 days?
When women are pregnant, the placenta pours out progesterone, and the level can go up to like 460 nanograms. Normally it's like 20. So, and this is what the fetus gets exposed to, by the way. And that's why I say that progesterone is extremely safe to use in children, because they've been exposed to really high levels of progesterone without any problem.
I have an anecdotal experience of this. When my mother had cancer several times and tumours several more times before she eventually died of it in her mid-50s. But I remember at the time that she got pregnant with my sister, she had either tumours or I think actually cancer in her uterus. And she got pregnant anyway, which, they described as a miracle. And the cancer completely went into regression as a result of that pregnancy. Now, she thought it was like a miracle from God, which, is a fair way of interpreting it. But my understanding of it more is that the mechanism is that once the woman's pregnant, at some point her body starts producing so much progesterone that it will actually be able to combat the cancer. Is that your understanding?
Yeah. I think that's very reasonable. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so that's my little anecdote from my childhood. It's nice to have these kind of mysteries solved. What about women who are no longer menstruating, menopausal women? Would you recommend that they just have it every day at the dose you recommended, or is there any difference?
When I put women on progesterone who are in the menopause just means no bleeding. That's what it. So if they're in the menopause, I have them use it every day. I don't cycle it. Some women think you should only use it for 2 weeks and be off for 2 weeks, but they're wrong. Just.
And what about what about sex drive for women? Because obviously sex drive for men is more controlled by testosterone or anything, but doesn't progesterone reduce the sex drive for women because it reduces estrogen? Is that why often testosterone is given along with progesterone to women in small amounts?
Okay, let me clarify something.
Mm-hmm.
Estrogen does nothing for the libido, nothing.
Well, I understand it makes you more sexually receptive. That's the mainstream understanding of...
No.
No? Okay.
It doesn't. You may be more sexually attractive, but not. No, but progesterone and testosterone are the two hormones that women have to have for libido.
Okay.
Progesterone and testosterone. Yeah, and men, testosterone, obviously.
Mm-hmm. So would increasing progesterone in women increase sex drive? That's what you're saying, not reduce?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
They can't have a sex drive without it.
Interesting. Okay. And I guess, so maybe, all right, so would that explain why the sex drive often goes down with birth control pills then, because it reduces the testosterone? Because it reduces the progesterone.
I'm surprised they have any sex drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. That's very unequivocal. One of the things I appreciate about you, Dr. Platt, is you speak very unequivocally, not like a lawyer. Great. Okay. Almost done. Couple of more questions. Thank you so much for your time. Thyroid. So I'm a big proponent and believer in thyroid, giving that to people if they need it. I'm a big believer that it's actually needed a lot more commonly than most people realize. Maybe 100 years ago, the medical community had a better understanding of thyroid than they do now. That's my opinion. What's your opinion on it, and how does it fit into everything we've been talking about from your perspective and experience?
The adrenaline does affect thyroid levels, by the way. And when people have a lot of adrenaline, they don't tolerate thyroid. Because they're both stimulants. And it's not unusual when people first start using progesterone and their adrenaline goes down, that they may have an underlying thyroid, hypothyroidism, and that kicks in. And all of a sudden, they complain about feeling really tired. And that's because that underlying low thyroid has been unmasked by taking away the adrenaline. It's not hard to get people in balance when it comes to thyroid. Even the doctors have a hard time with it. They look at TSH, and what doctors don't realize, there's no such thing as a normal TSH, because the only reason the body ever puts out TSH is when they're low in thyroid. And so to me, any TSH above 1 is high. So, and then now TSH is mostly a reflection of T4. Now T4 is what the thyroid produces. And then T4 goes to the liver and it converts into T3. And T3 does 90% of the work of the thyroid. That's the thyroid hormone. And very often doctors don't look at T3. And the other thing is, if the TSH is low, they won't treat. But the problem is there's something called secondary hypothyroidism. And this is where the pituitary doesn't put out enough TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And so this is why when you do thyroid testing, you can't look just at the TSH. You have to look at the T3 and the T4. And that's called a free T3 and a free T4. And now the other thing is, a lot of people use Armour thyroid, and there's no such thing as a bioidentical hormone or bioidentical thyroid for humans. They don't make it. And so Armour is bioidentical for pigs, which is okay, but I'm just saying, so it's not the same level of T3 and T4 as you would find in a human. Armour is mostly T3 with just a little bit of T4. So again, when using Armour, you should always add T4 to it.
Sorry, do you mean the other way around? Like Armour is mainly T4 with a little bit of T3?
No, it's the other way around. It's mostly T3 with a little bit of T4.
it's 45 micrograms of T4 and 9 micrograms of T3 per grain.
Well, it's not apples and oranges.
So you're talking about in terms of like the power of it.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, the effect of that 9 is a lot high. See, the normal level of T4 is like 125.
Okay.
The normal level of T3 is about 7.5. So even though the 9 looks like a lot less than the T4 in normal,
yeah, I'm with you.
It gets
because the T3 is so much more powerful.
It's confusing.
So are you saying that you would give, along with a glandule, you would give extra T4?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Well, that's me.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's the opposite of Ray Pete, who would say actually more T3. But yeah, fair enough. So long as you're giving some T3. And what would be your goal of where do you want to see T3 and T4 in the reference ranges for you to be satisfied that person now is enough?
Okay. Well, the upper limits of normal of T3 is like 4.2. So anywhere near there in the reference range. And people, they should make sure they take their thyroid on the day of the test. You know, a lot of doctors do fasting tests that people don't take their thyroid. But now the other thing about Armour is that the T3 only lasts for 3 hours. So I usually recommend that they break it in half and take a half in the morning and half at 2 p.m. And that way they won't get a slump in the afternoon.
I do agree with you about that. I do it exactly that way. Yeah, one after waking and then one kind of halfway through the day. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of that. I agree with that. Just quickly, testosterone. Do you recommend, bioidentical testosterone for men or women beyond a certain age? In some cases,
I recommend testosterone for men and women. I never recommend pellets. I don't. Because you can't control. There's no control. I like testosterone cream for men or women.
So that's interesting. I've noticed women are usually given cream, but men usually given injections. Sometimes they're giving like a week or even 2 weeks supply all in one injection, which seems like a bad idea to me. It seems like it would be better to, dose it more frequently at a lower dose.
Yeah, I like the creams because you have more control.
Yeah. Why are they not more commonly used? Do you have any idea? Like the creams for men?
Common one?
Why are the creams not as commonly used for men? Why do they prefer injection? Do you have any idea?
Well, the doctors get paid for the injections.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. But cream is always on prescription, right? Testosterone, I think it is in the US as well.
Only, yes.
Only, yeah. So either way you get paid. But okay.
And with women, the number one cause of death in women is heart attacks. Mm-hmm. And the heart has more testosterone receptor sites than any other tissue in the body. So testosterone is an extremely important hormone for the heart. But women don't have that testosterone like men do. So it's an important hormone to replace in women. And
is there a set amount that you usually use, or do you totally vary it depending on blood tests?
Usually I start with 2% cream, and after the first month go down to 1%.
2% cream, is that 2 milligrams, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a whole lot. 2
milligrams and then 1, yeah. And men are more like 10 milligrams something, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting. And last hormone, sorry, but it's you talk about all this in your book. I also recommend Dr. Platt's other book, by the way, Bioidentical Hormone. Sorry, what's the exact title of it? The Miracle of Bioidentical?
Well, the first book, The Miracle of Bioidentical Hormones.
Great, which I highly recommend as well. And the other one's called Adrenaline Dominance. So the other hormone so we talked about basically 4 hormones that are beneficial. 3 so far that are beneficial to people. We've talked about progesterone, we've just talked about thyroid, and we talked about testosterone. The last one that you mentioned in your book, I also am interested in, and it's DHEA. Could you tell us a little bit about DHEA? What when you would recommend it to someone? How much, that kind of thing?
At one time, DHEA is the most abundant hormone in the body. And they have found that those people, as people get older, their DHEA level goes down. And they almost look at DHEA as a biological marker for aging. Those people with the highest DHEA levels had the greatest longevity. So you could look at it as an anti-aging hormone. And it does have a lot of benefit. It downregulates into estrogen. It downregulates into testosterone. It has a lot of things that affects the body. So I don't usually think about treating it unless the levels are pretty low.
And what's pretty low, like bottom half of the reference range or bottom 25%?
Well, below 100.
Okay, fair enough.
You know, the reference range changes. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, no, carry on. There's this time delay because of the time zones. Carry on.
Oh, you're going to ask about Pregnenolone?
I was going to ask about Pregnenolone, yeah. Do you recommend that? Because Pregnenolone is a precursor to progesterone, right? Your body makes progesterone
It's a precursor to progesterone and DHEA.
Mm-hmm.
So I always prefer treating with those hormones rather than doing the precursor, you know.
Because it's more controllable, like you know what you're going to get?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But Pregnenolone, you're not against it. You just personally prefer to use progesterone.
Right.
And DHEA. Okay. One last question, Dr. Platt, and you can not answer this if you don't want to, but I think it would be very interesting to the viewer because you do talk about it in a chapter of your book, and it's about like your experience with the medical system. Are you open to talking about that, or?
Yeah, that's
not?
fine. I have no problem with that.
Okay. So, because you are a medical doctor, you know, you were board certified and all the rest of it, and then, as often happens, and has happened a lot, obviously, since 2020, when you started to actually cure people who are not supposed to be curable, you got in trouble. So can you tell us the story of that?
The medical board went after me. The only complaints they ever received were from doctors. And doctors were upset because every time their patients walked into my office, I took them off most, if not all, of their medications. And the reason for that is that I treat the underlying cause of illness. I don't give out Band-Aids. You know, drugs are the third leading cause of death, which means that doctors are the third leading cause of death. But the medical boards are funded by drug companies. So when they got these complaints about a doctor that's taking people off drugs, they went after me. And even though they never had a complaint from a patient, I've never harmed a patient, but they went after me. And I spent $500,000 trying to fight them. You can't beat them. And so eventually, because I ran out of money fighting them. I spent $500,000 trying to fight them. I surrendered my license. Now, and since then, they've arrested me 4 times for practicing medicine without a license. Now, what they mean by, you know, when they would send in undercover agents, which is what they did while they were harassing me. And and one fellow was a diabetic, and he was on a statin drug. And I pointed out that now I didn't know he was from the medical board. And I said to him, I said, one of the side effects of statin drugs is to cause diabetes. And because I told him that, he said I was practicing medicine without a license. And so that's still going on in courts now. I mean, you can't beat the medical board.
Yeah.
But the FDA is also controlled by drug companies. Drug companies control everything in medicine. You know, they control what doctors learn in medical school. And drug companies have no interest in people being healthy, and yet they control the medical board. You know, you may have heard of women that if they cough or sneeze, urine leaks out. They call that stress incontinence. And I used to treat that with testosterone intravaginally, and they would do those Kegels. 3 to 6 days, it was gone. 100% effective. So when the medical board found out I was doing that, just for the fact that I didn't do a pelvic exam on these patients, they wanted to take away my license. You know, they're just looking for things. They couldn't find anything where I was hurting people, so okay. I'm not a big fan. I'm not a big fan of our medical boards. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you. As I say, I feel some hope that the whole system will change, but I admit the chances are slim.
But if your listeners are interested, we do send progesterone to England.
Yes. So, all right, yeah, let's get to that then. So, if people want to find out more, let me say one more thing, and then let's go to that. I just want to emphasize that one of the best things about what you say, which I think is very compelling to people, especially in this day and age, is that you don't have to believe me, just try it. And with many things, you'll feel better literally within 24 hours. And even with many other things, you'll feel better within like a few days or a week, right? So this is not something that you have to commit to 3 months or 2 years or anything like that. Like, this is something where if you follow Dr. Platt's advice and he's right, then you will feel better really, really, really quickly, right? So you don't have to believe him. You don't have to believe me. It's something that if you're open-minded enough to try it, you'll see for yourself.
In my book, Adrenal Dominance, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the ugly, I have conditions like fibromyalgia and something called interstitial cystitis, and something called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I mean, all these conditions are felt to be incurable. Mm-hmm. And, the book I wrote, Adrenal Dominance, is the only book ever written that talks about adrenaline. Why is that? I mean, how could this be missed by the whole medical community?
Yeah, there's quite a bit on stress and cortisol, but I've not seen anything on adrenaline.
And by the way, progesterone cream is also good for dogs. Dogs that have what's called separation anxiety.
Interesting.
Or afraid of thunder or firecrackers. That goes inside the ear.
How much would you do? 50 milligrams for a dog? I guess it depends on the size.
Well, whatever can fit in the ear.
Okay.
You can't hurt the dog with it, and it goes away in about 1 minute. The separation anxiety.
And what about cat?
I don't see them having the same problem that dogs do, but
some of them, some of them do. I mean, our cats are all nice, but I know that and get on well.
I would certainly try it. It can't hurt them.
Some people have very belligerent cats, in my experience, so it could be worth a try.
Interesting.
Okay. Wow. Fantastic. So if people want to find out more, first thing, if they are the kind of people who read books, I would strongly recommend the books. I would say your books are well written, well structured, very easy to read, and also quick read, right? There's not a lot of filler material. So I definitely recommend both of his books very much, Adrenal Dominance and The Miracle of Bioidentical Hormones. I've read both twice now. Wanted to make sure I took it in, properly. And I'm a big fan. So other than that, you also have a website where people can find out more about you. What was that called?
Plattwellness.com.
Excellent.
PLATT wellness.com.
And we'll put a link to that underneath the video on YouTube and where you find podcasts. And we talked a lot about the benefits of progesterone. As you said, you sell that on your website. You sell the 50 milligrams. I like your progesterone as opposed to a lot of others out there because yours doesn't contain retinol, which I am not a big fan of. I don't believe in having extra vitamin A. I think most of us are overdoing it with vitamin A. So I appreciate that you don't have that added as many other brands do. I think that wouldn't be the selling point that you'd pick. You probably pick the point that it's stronger, right? Most people do 20 milligrams per pump and yours is 50 milligrams per pump. So the benefit of that is you need to spread less cream on you in order to get the required dose.
Right. If somebody has restless leg syndrome, they just have to put a pump on each thigh and rub it in. It'll go away in 30 seconds.
Amazing.
Or cramps in their calves. That's also adrenaline.
Yeah, I would put that down to maybe magnesium deficiency as well. But of course, adrenaline causes magnesium deficiency from my perspective. So I think they're connected. Fantastic. Anything else you would like to recommend as a next step for people watching? Do you have social media or anything that you want to encourage people to go to?
I have a marketer. I'll have her get in touch with you.
Okay. So I'll put the links underneath. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being brave enough to step up and sharing what you believe to be right and your own experience with, helping people in the real world, despite the obvious massive resistance that you're going to get. Thank you for doing the arduous work of actually getting it into book format, so it will live on, hopefully for a long time.
I hope so. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Platt.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwyn and I personally use. And that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwyn has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code REJUVENATEME for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code REJUVENATEME at feelyounger.net.